Thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to view this presentation on personal futures planning. We believe that the adoption of these core competencies into practice will improve the outcomes for children with behavioral health needs and their families. These foundational modules are developed to be viewed by family members, higher education students, paraprofessionals, and professionals. A list of resources and references have also been provided. This module will be presented by Jonathan Drake from the Institute on Disability at the University of New Hampshire. The New Hampshire Children's Behavioral Health Workforce Development Network is to build a sustainable infrastructure for the professional development of the children's behavioral health workforce based upon the core competencies and infused with the system of care core values and guiding principles. The need is for New Hampshire to have an adequate workforce and an infrastructure to support those who work with children, youth, and families. The New Hampshire Children's Behavioral Health Core Competencies were developed in 2011 by a representation of diverse stakeholder groups, including child-serving community mental health providers, family organizations, state policymakers, and university staff. The goal was that the competencies would be the first step in developing systematic and comprehensive human services development infrastructure. The competencies were developed using the system of care core values and principles as the foundation. There are 7 domains: family-driven and youth-guided practice, cultural and linguistic competence, childhood development and disorders, screening, assessment and referral, treatment planning, interventions and service delivery, systems knowledge and collaboration, and quality improvement. The competencies are organized for professional staff by levels of knowledge and skills in each domain. There are 3 levels: foundational, intermediary, and advanced. The levels are designed to identify the skill level of practitioners. They are fluid and not specifically tied to certain formal education and training or position titles. A copy of the report can be accessed, and a link is provided at the end of this presentation. This is one of a series of modules designed to support the development of core competencies in the children's behavioral health workforce. This is an introductory module that provides an overview of personal futures planning. Personal futures planning is an adaptation of person-centered planning catered towards transition age youth that engages them to reflect about their life, understand their support network, identify strengths and skills, and ultimately set and pursue goals based on their life aspirations. Professionals, friends, and family members can use this youth-directed process to help youth at risk to re-engage in productive experiences in order to build self-determination skills, create or enhance positive relationships, and begin on a path toward their dreams.
Personal futures planning for adolescents is a process of asking focused questions to articulate a vision of the young person's future. The idea is to illustrate a path for achieving that vision by identifying specific goals, strengths, support needs, and resources. Ultimately, the goal of personal futures planning is to have tools to be used for a youth-driven team that follows the futures planning once goals are identified by the youth. Personal futures planning is an adaptation of person-centered planning. Person-centered planning is a process where an individual and their family drives the decision-making process, where the focus of all the planning is determined by the youth and family. There's a high emphasis on natural supports, and they're utilized as much or more than service system supports. The attention is focused on strengths and building a team around the youth's goals and family's goals. And over time, the planning evolves where the family and team meet frequently enough to ensure that supporting team members are executing prompt action toward identified goals and outcomes. Within the Renew model, personal futures planning is used in phase 1, which is the engagement phase for youth. Here we learn about the youth, what their perspective of themselves are, who their resources are, and what their goals are as they relate to their dreams. Once personal futures planning is completed, we develop a team to develop a plan in supporting the youth in achieving their goals. This process is run by the youth and facilitated by a Renew facilitator. In Phase 3, we implement that plan and progress monitor that plan to make sure we're on track for it being met. And in Phase 4, over time, the youth develops skills and strategies so that they can do this process on their own without the support of a Renew facilitator. In thinking about where personal futures planning came from, we have to think about person-centered planning. Person-centered planning really began somewhere between the early 70s and late 80s, according to O'Brien. The idea was systems for supports in communities want to normalize processes for assisting families to support themselves in their communities, as well as utilize supports in a strategic manner where they're driving the process. And the results of that strategy were very effective. Later on, in New Hampshire, person-centered planning was adopted for families and people with disabilities who had needs of re-entering the communities and living in communities independently of support systems. Personal futures planning is comprised of various person-centered planning models. Common themes across these models are focusing on who the person and family are from their point of view, and working with those persons and families to understand what their goals, hopes, dreams, and fears are about themselves or situation and how to move forward. And then asking the question around, what do we do once we have this plan? How do we implement this plan so that we know that this youth and family over time will be working toward their goals in a way that they deem successful? The purpose of personal futures planning is to create meaningful, personalized, individualized plans using tools called maps. Maps are structured templates for recording conversations on flip chart paper. Throughout the mapping process, we identify supports at home, in the school, in the community that can be helpful to the youth in achieving their goals and addressing their support needs. Lastly, the purpose of personal futures planning is to assist the youth in building self-determination skills. These skills include goal setting, asking for help, understanding where you are in working toward your goals. Also understanding how to learn from failures in order to move forward later on in life. Mapping has a few core elements. Whenever we do personal futures planning, we're using flip chart paper, markers, or another way to capture a conversation within the mapping templates. These other options could be using a PowerPoint projected on the wall and typing into the PowerPoint, or we also have smartboards nowadays and other things that can capture information as we're talking about it with the youth. Personal futures planning maps also have a huge focus on words and graphics that capture the youth's story and their perspective of themselves and their situation. The reason why we use these maps is because we can use them as a focal point where everyone on the team can see the maps as they're being created. Maps also can be used later on to orient team members and to drive the team process. For personal futures planning, there are two main roles. There's the youth, who's there to share their story, and then there's the facilitator, who's there to structure the conversations around the youth story to understand different aspects of the youth and where they're coming from. The main difference here from person-centered planning is that the facilitator and youth start out this process with just the two of them typically, without anyone else attending these conversations. Sometimes the youth may invite parents or mentors to come into their planning meetings as well, and then also sometimes, as requested by the student, there are reasons to invite other people to come on board during the planning process. Typically though, The youth and facilitator are the only ones present during personal futures planning, and once the teams are developed around the youth's goals, it's at that point where the parent, mentors, and other support people come on board to help the youth pursue their goals. The role of the student is to share their story, to plan around the goals for their future, and to work toward them. They also have to make sure that the maps are accurate as the facilitator records them. Sometimes the facilitator misrepresents what the youth is saying or their meaning, and it's up to the youth to share with the facilitator that this is happening and to correct the facilitator as it happens. The role of facilitator is to ask questions around each of the topic areas for each of the map templates, to draw the maps, capture the conversations with words and graphics, and then later on to help the youth make connections between themes within maps and across maps. And this is mostly helpful for planning around goals and objectives and how to pursue goals and objectives moving forward as the youth pursues their dreams. When the parent or mentor come on board, they're there to support the student by first being a good listener and engaged. They also may contribute where asked by the facilitator or student. There are some topic areas where it's helpful to have the parent or mentor talk about the student or give insights, and then other areas it's not appropriate to do so. They also can provide additional information around the conversations that include strengths, accomplishments, and they also can provide ideas around resources for pursuing goals and dreams. During personal futures planning, the facilitator is using 3 simultaneous skills: active listening, synthesizing and organizing information, and then drawing the information on the maps. When you're active listening, you're being a conduit for the information being discussed by the youth. You're also flowing the words that the youth is saying onto the paper using the flip charts and the templates for the maps, and then reflecting back to the student, showing that you understand what they're saying and that the information you're writing is being accurate. As far as synthesizing and organizing information goes, you're using the map templates to keep the information together so that it can be read efficiently and understood by others. You also may be using colors to represent different approaches, moods, and meanings to the content under each topic area. While drawing, facilitators are using symbols and graphics to convey the themes, meanings that the youth is saying, and to keep the youth interested in the process. When doing maps for youth, the facilitator is using graphic facilitation. Graphic facilitation is a simple format of using lines and shapes and different figures to represent different parts of a conversation in words. These are the Renew maps for personal futures planning. The facilitator starts off with history, then moves on to who you are today, and talks about strengths and accomplishments. Then we'll talk about people and resources. Then what works and doesn't work for the youth in different contexts. What the youth's dreams are. What their fears, concerns, and barriers are for the future and currently. What the youth's goals are as they relate to the dreams and other goals. What next steps need to be pursued to work toward goals. And what are the things we need to get started on right away to make sure we're on task in reaching the youth's goals. Sometimes this is fluid, where you revisit maps on an annual basis or update them as new information or goals arise for the youth. In order to give an idea of what personal futures planning looks like, I'm going to share a story of a young lady who had been on probation for a long time, and her goal was to get off probation. Her history map, you can see here, start off with her talking about all kinds of family themes. At 4 years old, she experienced some loss with a grandmother and an uncle, and some detachment around and some frustration around not being able to go to see their funeral. Later on, she talks about how her mom remarried a person named Mike. And we can see that in personal futures planning, different symbols represent different things. Here, an arrow represents a bridge in time between life events. Here is an example. For T here, a long life event for her that didn't have any significant events for her, as she sees it, was middle school. So we used an arrow to capture that event and just label it with middle school, and that generally that experience for T was good. Later on, when T became 12 years old, she was living with her father, who ended up throwing her out, from her words, and she had to go live with her mom. She had mixed feelings about this. And the face here shows that she was a little bit stressed about it as well. It was for a long time that she didn't talk to her father, and this made her very upset. There's another transition happens here for about a year. At this point, she remembers going camping with a group of friends, and that was an awesome experience for her. Also during her 13-year-old time period, she was with a large group of friends who she deemed as a bad influence on her. A year later, these friends end up putting her in a situation, from her point of view, where she got arrested, and that's where she started probation at age 14. At age 15, we see another family theme here, where her grandparents passed away, and as a result of that, her mom ended up in a hospital because she was stressed about that situation and was unsafe to herself at that time. And she herself, T, went into placement for 4 days because she also was having a hard time dealing with all those situations. Now at 15 and a half, she's still on probation, but something good has happened. She's been reunited with her father, and around that she's experiencing some happiness. And she hopes that that relationship will continue to kindle over time. So here, as we look at this history map, we learned from T that family is very important for her. She's had some stressful events that have kind of put her in a place where she's stuck now on probation. And she's also has some setting events with her family and the stresses in her families that may be affecting her decisions currently in her life. This is an example of a Who I Am Today map. The template for this map usually has the person in the center, and then we ask the youth to brainstorm all the different things about themselves that they might use to describe themselves in their situation or to others around them. So we can see here for T, she sees herself as exciting, sporty, adventurous. Remember, family is an important theme, and right now, home for her is going through cycles of good, rough, for some days. She also said up here that she sees herself as a freshman in quotes. The quotes are there because she's actually a second-year freshman. She didn't pass her first year, so she hasn't accumulated enough credits to be a sophomore. Over here, she sees herself as being adventurous in one way, and over here, adventurous in another way. One way is good, and one way is not good. The not good has to do with her experimenting with risky events, as well as the use of drugs with her friends. And see here, the family theme pops up again. She sees herself as being very family-oriented. She also wanted to list all the important people in her life here, which is fine. So as she listed all of her friends and family, we wrote them down here on this map. She also has interest in these areas: going camping, nature, drawing. She likes to cuddle. She likes reading and writing. And then finally, she couldn't really express her thoughts with just one word, so she wanted to write down full statements about herself. And here she talks about when she and her mom fight, it makes her sad because she wants to get along with her. When she fights with her siblings, It makes her sad and upset because she doesn't want them to think she doesn't love them. And then she wishes her mom and dad were still together down here. Again, for this young lady, family is so important for her, and we see how this affects how she perceives herself today. Here's an example of a strengths and an accomplishments map. On the left, we brainstorm all the different strengths the youth has from her perspective. So T likes to write. She feels like she's good at it. She's good at relaxing. Ice skating, volleyball, cooking and baking, reading, helpful to others. And she feels like she's good at math. Singing, debating with others. And here, same color as the strength is family. Family is a strength for her. Her accomplishments are building a fire and graduating middle school. Okay. The reason why we have this conversation with youth is to help reframe their minds about who they are as a person. Often when we work with youth for long periods of time, they feel like, especially youth with emotional behavioral disabilities or kids who need tier 3 interventions, they have kind of a bad perspective of who they are. So by talking about strengths, it can help them shift that perspective into a more productive one. We also have the conversation around accomplishments because from accomplishments we can understand what skills a youth has. So for T, around graduating middle school, we asked her what skills she needed to do that. She said controlling her temper, having good organizational skills, good academic skills, having positive relationships, and staying away from drama. We have this conversation as well because when we get to the planning phase around moving forward, you'll hear later that T wanted to get off probation as one of her goals. In order to do that, she needed to stay out of trouble. So we would go back to this map and ask T, when you had to stay away from drama and trouble back in middle school, what were some of the strategies you used? And she would say that by finding good friends to hang out with, she was able to stay away from the ones that got her in trouble. And that's one strategy we implemented later on and with her team that got her off probation. Here's an example of a resource map. The idea around the resources map is to catalog all the different people and supports that the youth has in their life. Sometimes these maps start out relatively empty. In that case, as we develop resources and supports around the youth's dreams, we will catalog those supports and resources in this map. In a resources map, there are different types of resources that we talk about with the youth. The template has various circles to represent those resources. The first circle here is the intimate or close group. We describe this to youth as people that they can depend on, who they're close to, who are going to be there for them no matter what, in a positive way. Out here, we talk about friends and positive relationships. And the last circle are paid supports, professionals, or groups that the youth can belong to. And outside of the circle are people who are not helpful to the youth in achieving their goals. Which leads me to another purpose for why we have this resources map. It teaches the youth about types of relationships. It teaches youth about good relationships and helpful relationships and ones that aren't helpful. And for some youth, that's tough to learn about. So framing this conversation to youth is really important so they understand that sometimes a boyfriend or girlfriend may not be a close or intimate relationship because they're unreliable or they haven't known that person for very long. And also this map is helpful for us understanding family dynamics. See, here we can tell other people that dad is a positive relationship for that youth, but because he kicked her out when she was younger and because T hasn't seen him for a while, he doesn't fit into the close circle yet. From her perspective, he's working his way in from the outer circles. Here we have an example of a preferences map. Preferences maps are used to learn about what works and doesn't work for youth in different situations. In this situation, we talked with T about what works and doesn't work within a classroom setting, and what helped her learn, and what prevented her from learning. So for T, In class, when she becomes stressed, frustrated, confused, it's helpful for her to talk things through with the teacher and an adult or another student. Also, when she becomes frustrated or confused, sometimes she needs a 5-minute break away from the task. What's also helpful for T is that she's giving choices of tasks or work to do instead of just one thing at a time. This way, if she feels more able to do one task over another, she can tackle that one first and then come back to the more difficult one afterwards. She also does well with hands-on and visual learning. And if she's off task, it's helpful if the teacher asks her to help out with a task to get her back on task, like handing out papers or keeping track of what people are saying during an activity. Lastly, T remembers things better if she writes them down or reads them. And this isn't for a lot of kids, so this really provides a lot of really good information for teachers about what helps T learn in their classes. On the other hand, what doesn't work for T is if she's being yelled at if she's off task or doing something wrong. Also, if you give her negative alternatives, for example, if you don't do this, you have to go to the office, then she's more likely to go to the office. So, better to redirect her or give her options versus telling her she has to do it or else. She also doesn't do with lecture learning, sitting down for long periods of time. When teachers ask her to do things in front of the classroom, it makes her nervous. So either avoid putting her on the spot in front of other kids or pre-teach her how to address the question ahead of time will be helpful for her. Again, sitting through a long period of class is not good for her. She's at a block scheduled school, so these classes are 90 minutes, and she has a hard time sitting for the entire class, mainly because she has ADHD and other things. She also can't learn if there's too much talking in class or noise. So where she's going to be set off the most is where there's a lot of things going on that's distracting her from the topic or tasks at hand. Another reason why we have the works and doesn't work conversation in the preferences maps is because it's really easy for kids sometimes to explain or brainstorm what doesn't work for them in a classroom setting or other settings. And what we can do with that is once they tell us what doesn't work, we can help reframe that into what works. So again, here, being yelled at if she's off task here is something that doesn't work for her. So then we can reframe that and asking what does work. And down here she was able to say that if she's allowed to help with tasks when she's off task, that will redirect her and get her back engaged into the task at hand. For those of you familiar with functional behavioral assessments or behavior support plans, a preferences map can be crucial in developing one of these for kids with individualized needs within a school setting, or even in the home setting or community setting, or even on the job. Here's an example of a dreams map. The dreams map is important for youth to help them think outside of the box where they are now and think more on the future. Often adolescents don't really plan for the future unless they're intentionally thinking about it. So we use this map to help the youth think about where they want to be as an adult, and if everything were to happen perfectly between now and then, where they would be at with what type of employment they have, what types of relationships do they have in their future, what are some of their accomplishments they've had between now and when they're an adult, and also what are some of the things they might obtain as an adult or between now and when they're an adult. For a lot of youth, this is the first time in a long time they've thought about the future and careers. Mostly youth focus on the now and today, and so by intentionally thinking about the dreams map, it typically opens up pathways in their mind and doors for us to plan around when we start setting goals. The fears map is an opportunity for the youth to think about all the different potential obstacles that could get in their way between now and when they're an adult, or it could also focus on generally what they have for fears about the future. So for T, her biggest fear and concern was that she would never get off probation. She'd been on probation for a very long time. It always seems to haunt her, as the rain cloud does, and often we see often in cartoons. And so that's how she described probation for herself. Um, she also has a fear of trusting others because she felt like a lot of people have let her down in her life. And she's also has a fear of losing family support. Family, throughout her entire futures plan, is a consistent theme that's important to her. And if she were to lose family, she would feel very insecure. And like a lot of teenagers, T has a fear of others hating her, so she takes the opinions of others very seriously about her, and that can affect her negatively or positively. Um, and T also knows that when she gets stressed, that's a barrier for her in reaching her goals and dreams because she tends to um, check out a little bit quicker or can be set off a little bit quicker behaviorally in different environments. And lastly, for T, she's afraid of getting heartbroken again by family or potential future loved ones. This is an example of a goals map. Goals maps help youth focus on what they're going to work on now that can help them get on a path toward achieving their dreams. So for this year, when we were working with T, she said her main goal was to get off probation. She had been on probation for a long time and really wanted to focus on getting off probation so that she felt secure in pursuing her other goals and her future dreams. Another thing that's important for her to do in order to get off probation was to stay out of trouble. And she also had to get good grades in school. Good grades in school would help her get off probation, but also would help her graduate from school, which is one of her dreams. Like a lot of other kids, she also was interested in getting a job and getting a license. T lives in rural New Hampshire, so having a license is a key to a lot of opportunities for her to be successful in her life where she sees herself now. And lastly, she also wanted to consider looking into her nursing career. And so, looking into that with her guidance counselor or other team members as they come on board would be something we pursue throughout the year, in addition to the other goals. Goals help give a youth a direction to pursue immediately so they can feel confident that the things that they're doing are helping them get closer and closer to their dreams in the long run. After the youth picks their goals that they want to work on, the next step would be to prioritize those goals and then brainstorm immediate next steps that would be taken or could be taken to work toward each goal. We usually do this through the brainstorming process with the youth at first and then with our team members later. How this typically looks is that the youth picks a goal, then we brainstorm what do we need to do right now to start working toward that goal, and who can help with each of those things. Once they pick the things they want to do next, we'll invite the people who can help with those things to an action group meeting or a team meeting. And those people will come on board and do additional brainstorming around next steps and how to achieve them. Then they offer supports. And as the youth completes next steps, they get closer and closer in reaching their goal, which also is a milestone toward them reaching their dreams. As youth progresses down this path, it's really important for them to feel like they've accomplished things and that they're working toward their goals and dreams, so that they feel bought into this process and feel confident in themselves and builds hope for the future. Here's an example of that brainstorming process for T. T wanted to, again, get off probation as one of her goals. An immediate step for that was to do well in school, as we saw before. And to do well in school, she knew she had to get help with math, to find a quiet place to do her work inside of school and outside of school. She needed help getting organized and needed help developing a plan for what works and doesn't work in class. Her resources for each of these things were teachers, mentors, parents, and other resources that exist inside and outside the school that can help her brainstorm strategies around each of these sub-steps. And this group of people became her first action group or team that would support her in achieving her goals. As a result of T's futures planning process and the team process, T was able to develop a rapport with her JPPO. With her probation officer present, T was able to align her renew goals and her probation goals, which were to stay out of trouble, do well in school, follow a curfew, and stay away from drugs and alcohol. Through the team process, she developed supports and continued organizing resources around her goals. Her support system were her best friend, her mom, her probation officer, and other school resources. And once she developed the plan for her to get off probation, she presented the plan to her 504 team for extra help in class. With T driving this process and the people supporting her in this process, she was able to get off probation within a matter of months of starting this process, ultimately reaching one of her goals to allow her to pursue her dreams. To summarize what we talked about throughout this module, personal futures planning is a type of person-centered planning that's geared toward adolescents and young adults. As with any other types of person-centered planning, it prioritizes the youth and family's goals, places the youth and family in charge of that process. Personal futures planning is a means for identifying and developing resources to assist the youth in reaching their goals. And personal futures planning is a fundamental tool for teaching youth and families to do this independently of a person-centered planning or personal futures planning facilitator. It is my hope that you found the information in this module worthwhile. If you'd like some more information on personal futures planning or person-centered planning or the Renew model, please contact me, Jonathan Drake, at the Institute on Disability within the University of New Hampshire at jonathan.drake@unh.edu. Thank you.